The boy's hands were raw from the cold, his knuckles still split and caked with dried blood. He hadn't eaten in days, but hunger was the last thing on his mind. The image of the old man crumpled against the wooden floorboards of Murphy's trading post burned hotter in his memory than the midday sun ever could. Sawyer Briggs had not planned to become anyone's protector that morning. He was just another forgotten shadow in a town that barely noticed him, thin as fence wire, clothed in rags stitched more times than he could count, surviving on scraps no one else wanted. Yet something inside him had shifted when he saw the elder standing there, silver hair bound with beads that caught the light like fragments of a forgotten star, voice calm even under the lash of the storekeeper's cruelty. Sawyer knew the look in the old man's eyes. He had worn it himself, the quiet humiliation of being treated as less than human. When Clyde Hargrove's men closed in, the scene turned ugly fast. Beautiful beadwork, months of patient labor, was swept to the ground and crushed under a boot heel. Sawyer had seen dogs beaten for less cause. His body had moved before his mind caught up, bursting through the door with a voice sharper than the wind off the plains. "Leave him alone." By the time the shouting ended, both boy and elder stood together in the middle of the store, defying men twice their size. It was a small act, nothing that would make the history books at least, that's what Sawyer thought. But the next morning, when the sun broke over the eastern hills, a sound rose that made every soul in town still their breath. Hoofbeats, many of them rolling across the earth like distant thunder. 100 riders crested the ridge in perfect formation, their faces painted, their eyes fixed on the heart of the town. And in that moment, the people of Murphy's Crossing realized they had witnessed something far greater than a boy's impulse to do what was right. The morning had started like every other for Sawyer, empty stomach, empty pockets, and no reason to linger where decent folk could notice him. He crouched behind the crates outside Murphy's trading post, trying to ignore the gnawing ache in his belly. The scent of fresh bread drifted from inside, warm and cruel, a reminder of what he couldn't have. Through the dirt-streaked window, he saw the elder, tall but worn by years, hands wrapped around a small leather pouch. His silver hair, braided with beads of turquoise and bone, shimmered in the shaft of sunlight spilling through the glass. Each bead told a story Sawyer knew, stories people like Murphy never cared to hear. Inside, the storekeeper's voice was sharp enough to cut rope. "No trade with your kind. Take your trinkets and get out." The words carried through the thin walls, each syllable dipped in contempt. Sawyer watched the elder stand straighter, his voice calm, speaking of medicine for a sick granddaughter, offering beadwork, whose beauty was matched only by its patience. But Murphy wasn't alone for long. Two more men entered Clyde Hargrove's hired hands, mean-eyed and thick-shouldered. They flanked the elder like wolves circling an injured deer. Then Clyde himself emerged, a mountain of a man with fists like hammers and a smirk that promised harm. The pouch was ripped from the elder's grip, its contents spilled a cascade of color against dull wood. Intricate bracelets, a necklace fine as spider silk, each piece worth far more than any bottle of medicine on Murphy's shelf. Clyde swept his arm across the counter. Beads skittered to the floor, and his boot came down hard, snapping the delicate necklace in two. A sound escaped the elder, then a quiet, breaking thing. And in that instant, Sawyer saw himself reflected in those dark eyes. Years of being told he was nothing, of being pushed aside until you started to believe it. His pulse roared in his ears. Every instinct told him to keep low, to wait until the danger passed. But when Clyde drew back his hand toward the old man's face, something in Sawyer's chest snapped. He was moving before he knew why, the door slamming open so hard it rattled the windows. "Leave him alone." The room stilled. 3 pairs of hostile eyes turned toward the scarecrow boy standing in the doorway. His voice trembled, but he didn't step back. Clyde's gaze raked over Sawyer from head to toe, lingering on the threadbare coat, the hollow cheeks, the way his boots looked ready to fall apart with one more step. A slow, cruel smile spread across his broad face. Boy, you look like you haven't had a meal in a week. Why don't you run along before you collapse where you stand? Sawyer stepped forward instead, placing himself between Clyde's men and the elder. His knees felt like they might give way, but something hotter than fear kept him upright. The elder's hand touched his shoulder, voice low. Young one, this is not your fight. Sawyer shook his head, eyes fixed on Clyde. It is now. I know what it's like to be hungry, to have no one stand up for you. I'm not walking away. One of the hired hands chuckled darkly. Kid thinks he's a hero. He took a step closer, his shadow swallowing Sawyer's thin frame. Clyde's voice dropped to a dangerous growl. You're making a big mistake. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? Doesn't matter who you are, Sawyer shot back. What matters is what you're doing. And it's wrong. The tension thickened, pressing down like a storm about to break. Outside, the murmur of passing townsfolk began to gather as faces pressed to the dusty windows. Clyde's pride was a brittle thing, and being challenged, especially by a ragged boy, was like grinding glass into an open wound. His fist came up fast, a heavy blur, aimed at Sawyer's head. Years of living on the streets had taught the boy when to duck, and he did feeling the rush of air as the punch sailed past. Clyde stumbled, humiliated, his face flushing red. The elder stepped forward, voice urgent. Please, there is no need for this. But Clyde wasn't listening. His hand shot out, gripping Sawyer by the shirt front and hauling him off the floor like a rag doll. The boy's boots dangled inches above the wood. Clyde's other fist drew back, and the crowd outside shifted, sensing the blow about to fall. Sawyer met his eyes. Go ahead, hit me. It won't change what you are. The words hit harder than any fist. Clyde's jaw clenched, but before he could swing, the elder moved, catching the punch on his own arm. The impact staggered him, but he stayed upright, dignity unbroken. Enough, the elder said, his voice carrying an authority that silenced the room. Clyde dropped Sawyer to the floor, turning his fury fully on the elder. Old man, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. Nobody crosses me in my town. But the elder stood straighter now, the quiet pleading gone. His eyes locked on Clyde's, unflinching. Your town? This land has seen many who claim to own it. None kept it forever. Outside, the crowd swelled, whispers prickling against the store's walls. Hats came off, women covered their mouths. The shift in the air was palpable. Murphy's Crossing was watching. Clyde grabbed the elder's shirt, fabric tearing under his grip. Sawyer, still unsteady, stepped forward and rested a hand on Clyde's massive arm. Let him go, please. The word was simple, stripped of challenge, but heavy as a stone. For a heartbeat, something flickered in Clyde's expression, uncertainty, maybe even shame, but Murphy's voice cut through. Clyde, the sheriff's coming. That warning made Clyde hesitate. Trouble with the law in front of half the town was a problem. Even he couldn't brush aside. Sheriff Coleman pushed through the door moments later, eyes sweeping the scene, the beadwork shattered on the floor, the elder's torn shirt, the boy standing defiant despite the fear still trembling through him. Murphy stammered a false account, but the elder spoke plainly, and Sawyer backed him. Coleman listened, his jaw tightening as the truth became clear. Still, Clyde's shadow loomed large over the town's politics. Justice here was not a clean thing. It was weighed, bartered, often buried. The sheriff's gaze lingered on a broken necklace, its beadwork so fine it could only have been made by loving hands. The elder confirmed a 12-year-old granddaughter's work, 3 months in the making, meant to buy the medicine she needed. The weight of that truth settled heavy in the sheriff's posture. He faced Clyde. "You're going to pay for the damage, and you're going to apologize." Clyde laughed without humor. "Like hell I am." "Maybe it cost me my badge," Coleman replied evenly, "but some things are worth the price." The crowd outside pressed closer to the windows. Inside, the tension hung taut, ready to snap. Then, far off at first, came a sound unlike any in town that day, the steady, growing thunder of many hooves approaching from the eastern hills, and with it the beginning of a reckoning no one in Murphy's Crossing was prepared for. The first to notice was a boy in the crowd, his head tilting toward the open street. Then others turned, their murmurs falling into silence, as the sound grew a deep, rhythmic pounding that rolled through the ground and into the bones. Hoofbeats, not the erratic thunder of a cattle stampede, but the steady, deliberate cadence of riders who had come with purpose. Faces pressed harder against the store windows. Out beyond the edge of town, heat shimmer blurred the horizon, and then they appeared, dark silhouettes cresting the ridge in perfect formation. 100 horses, moving as one, the sun flashing off polished bridles, and the painted symbols on the riders' faces. Sheriff Coleman stepped toward the door, eyes narrowing. Good Lord, there must be 100 of them. His hand fell from his revolver, not in fear, but in recognition of something beyond his jurisdiction. Inside, the elder's posture shifted. Gone was the weary man, asking for medicine. His spine straightened, shoulders squared, his gaze sharpening with a leader's gravity. Clyde's face paled. His voice for once held no swagger. You're Chief Royce Barrett." The elder's smile was faint but carried the weight of history. "I am, and these are my people, come to see what has happened to their chief." The riders fanned out into a wide semicircle around the trading post, their horses breathing clouds into the warm air. At their center, a man dismounted, broad-shouldered, his steel-gray hair cut by scars that told of battles won and survived. His eyes swept the building, assessing every soul within before he stepped forward, with the silence of a predator certain of its place in the wild. The elder spoke softly, almost to himself. "Sterling Maddox, my war leader. He has been watching since I entered this town." Clyde's swagger collapsed entirely, replaced by the stillness of a man realizing the ground beneath him had shifted and there would be no easy way back. The trading post doors swung open without haste, yet the presence that stepped through seemed to draw every eye, pulling the air taut. Sterling Maddox moved like a man carved from the same stone as the mesas, solid, immovable, dangerous in stillness. His gaze found the elder first, taking in the torn shirt, the bruise blooming on his arm. Then his eyes traced the wreckage on the floor, the shattered beads, the trampled necklace before coming to rest on Sawyer. The boy felt as if those dark eyes could strip away every layer of him, seeing the nights he'd slept in alleyways, the hunger that had sharpened his bones, the fear that still gnawed at his ribs. But what he saw there was not pity. It was appraisal. "Who stood with you?" Sterling's voice was low, each syllable deliberate. The elder stepped toward Sawyer and laid a weathered hand on his shoulder. "This young warrior placed himself between me and those who would do harm. When I was struck, he did not flee. When I was threatened, he did not hide. His heart carries our people's courage, though his skin is different." Sterling studied him in silence, the weight of his scrutiny heavier than Clyde's grip had been. Finally he asked, "You have no family?" Sawyer's answer was barely a whisper. "No, sir." "No home?" "No, sir. I sleep wherever I can." A brief exchange passed between Sterling and the chief, wordless but rich with meaning. Then the elder's voice softened in a way that felt like the first thaw of spring. "We offer you both. Our tribe's law is clear. One who risks his own safety for an elder, especially the chief, is kin from that day forward. You defended not just a man, but the father of our people. Sawyer's breath caught. After years of being invisible, of hearing only rejection, the words felt like sunlight breaking through a long winter. Sawyer's voice wavered. I don't understand. You don't even know me. Chief Barrett's eyes held him steady. I know you did not look away when evil showed its face. You had nothing to gain, yet you stood your ground. That is all I need to know. Sterling stepped closer, placing a firm hand on Sawyer's other shoulder. From this day, you are not alone. You will learn our ways, work beside us, and we will stand for you as you stood for our chief. The moment hung, almost sacred, until Clyde's voice cut through, raw with desperation. Now wait just a minute. You can't just take him. There are laws. Sterling's gaze snapped to him, cold as the wind that sweeps down from the high peaks. The boy chooses for himself. As for you, he reached into a leather pouch and produced a handful of gold coins, each one gleaming in the dim light. He placed them on Murphy's counter with a deliberate finality. Payment for the goods you destroyed and for the insult to our people. What you deserve, merchant, is far less generous. Sheriff Coleman, sensing the balance of the moment, spoke evenly. That settles damages, but the chief's word will carry far. Barrett's eyes shifted back to Clyde. Word of this day will travel to every camp and council. How you are regarded depends on what you do next. We are not unreasonable, but we do not forget. Clyde's skin had gone pale, the weight of those words pressing heavier than any lawman's verdict. He said nothing. The chief turned back to Sawyer. You can remain here, where you have suffered, or ride with us, and know what it means to have family. Sawyer glanced once around the trading post, the broken beadwork, the sheriff's approving nod, Clyde's hollow stare, and then met Barrett's gaze. I choose family. Outside, the warriors waited in silence, the afternoon sun gilding their ranks. A place among them now belonged to a boy who had arrived in town as no one and, in the span of a day, had been claimed as a son. The air outside felt different, sharper, charged with the weight of something irreversible. The crowd parted in silence as Chief Barrett led Sawyer out of Murphy's trading post. Sterling was already holding the reins of a tall chestnut mare, her coat gleaming like polished copper in the afternoon sun. Sawyer hesitated, his hand brushing the leather as if afraid the horse might vanish if he touched it too quickly. Sterling leaned in, his voice meant only for him. She'll carry you far, young brother. You've earned her. As Sawyer swung awkwardly into the saddle, he caught sight of Clyde standing in the doorway, face tight and unreadable. Behind him, Murphy hovered like a man watching his own fortunes slip away. Sheriff Coleman stood with arms folded, the faintest nod passing between him and the boy. It wasn't the nod of law, it was the nod of respect. The riders shifted to make space, their formation fluid yet precise. Chief Barrett mounted his own horse, glancing toward Sawyer with a look that mixed pride and promise. Then, as they began to ride, Sterling drew closer once more. There's something you should know, he murmured. The granddaughter whose beadwork was destroyed, she recovered 3 days ago. This journey wasn't for medicine. It was to see the hearts of those in this town. Sawyer's breath caught. The test hadn't been of trade, it had been of character, and somehow, without knowing, he had passed. They moved through the main street, hooves drumming in unison. Townsfolk stood aside, hats clutched to their chests, some in quiet awe, others in shame. No one spoke until the warriors reached the edge of town, where the open land stretched toward the eastern hills. Ahead lay a world. Sawyer had never known one that might finally feel like home. The line of riders flowed into the open country like a living river. sunlight flashing on beadwork, braids, and polished weapons. The rhythmic beat of 100 hooves became a pulse Sawyer could feel in his chest, steadying the wild tremor in his heart. The wind carried scents he hadn't known. He missed sagebrush, sun-warmed earth, the faint sweetness of distant pine. No one spoke for a while. It wasn't silence born of caution, but of shared purpose. The warriors rode as if each knew his place without needing to ask. Sawyer glanced to his left and right. Wherever his gaze fell, he met eyes that did not measure him by his hunger or the patchwork of his clothes. Chief Barrett rode slightly ahead, his profile etched sharp against the afternoon sky. Every so often he glanced back, not to check if Sawyer was keeping up, but as if to make sure the boy was seeing, truly seeing, the land that was now opening to him. Sterling eventually drew alongside again, his deep voice carrying easily over the hoofbeats. When you ride with us, you ride as one of us. You will learn our ways, our history, our tongue, but most of all you will learn that courage binds more tightly than blood. Sawyer let the words settle. For the first time in years, the gnawing fear of where he would sleep that night or how he'd find food tomorrow had loosened its grip. He didn't just feel rescued, he felt claimed. Behind them, the town of Murphy's Crossing was already fading into the heat haze, shrinking into a blur of dust and wooden walls. Ahead, the hills rose like a promise, their ridges catching the sun in bands of gold and shadow. Sawyer's hands tightened on the reins, not from uncertainty, but from the sharp, almost unfamiliar sensation that he finally belonged somewhere. They reached the hills as the sun bent low, washing the land in copper light. Beyond the first ridge lay a valley cradled in green where the river curved like a silver ribbon and smoke from cooking fires drifted lazily into the cooling air. The camp spread wide, hides stretched between poles, horses grazing at the edge of tall grass. Children darted between tents, laughter carrying on the wind, while elders sat in quiet conversation, their faces turning toward the returning riders. When the formation broke, it wasn't with military precision, but with the warmth of homecoming. Warriors clasped forearms, women called greetings, and curious eyes turned to the boy riding among them. Sawyer slid from the mare's back, his legs unsteady from the ride, and found the ground beneath him felt different, solid, certain. Chief Barrett led him toward the center of camp where a great fire was being stoked. This, the chief said, his voice carrying for all to hear, is Sawyer Briggs. Today he stood when no one else would. Today he became our kin. A murmur rose, not of skepticism, but of approval. A small boy stepped forward and handed Sawyer a carved wooden bead, its surface etched with the same pattern as those he had seen crushed under Clyde's boot. For you, the boy said simply. Sawyer closed his fingers around it. The weight was nothing, yet it felt heavier than gold. As the fire caught and the sky deepened to indigo, he looked around at faces lit by flame and saw no suspicion, no pity, only acceptance. In the shifting light, the years of hunger and wandering seemed to fall away, leaving a space ready to be filled by something new. For the first time in as long as he could remember, Sawyer knew he had reached the end of one road and the beginning of another. In the seasons that followed, Sawyer learned that a man's worth was not counted in coins or the cut of his coat, but in the weight of his word and the steadiness of his hand when others faltered. The tribe did not measure him by the color of his skin, nor by the empty past he had carried into their valley. They measured him by the choice he had made on a dusty street in a town that never cared for him, by the fact that when the moment came, he stood. The bead the young boy had given him never left his side. He wore it on a leather cord around his neck, a reminder of the necklace destroyed and of the courage that had brought him into a new life. Every time his fingers closed around it, he remembered the elder's words. You did not look away. Stories have a way of growing in the telling, but in this one, the heart of it remained true. Around winter fires, elders would speak of the starving white boy who faced down Clyde Hargrove, who risked his life for a stranger, and who rode away with 100 warriors as his escort. Children listened wide-eyed, not because he was strong or feared, but because he had chosen what was right when it was hardest to do so. Back in Murphy's Crossing, Clyde's name became a shadow. Trade with the tribes dried up like a creek in high summer, and though no one raised a hand against him, his empire of intimidation withered. People spoke less of his wealth and more of the day he was humbled by a boy who had nothing to lose. Sawyer never returned to the town that had watched him go, not out of bitterness, but because life had taught him to walk toward what gave him purpose, not back toward what had tried to break him. He learned the language of his new family, rode their trails, hunted their game, and stood with them in their councils. And in time, when younger warriors asked how he had come to be among them, he would tell the story simply, "One day I saw a man being wronged. I knew I could be hurt. I knew I could be killed. But I also knew I couldn't live with myself if I turned away." Courage, he had learned, was not the absence of fear. It was choosing to face it because something else mattered more. That truth had lifted him from the dust of the street into the circle of the fire, from the edge of hunger into the heart of belonging. In the language of his new people, there was a word for such a choice, a word that meant both warrior and one who protects. From that day forward, it was the only name he needed